My path into tech wasn't your typical path. I mean, I lived in 6 countries. I went to 10 schools. I got kicked out of 3.
So thank you so much for being here.
Anytime, always find time for a friend.
Exactly. So we're here with Richard Armstrong. We've actually known each other for a couple of years now.
Yeah.
But it's been a few years, and we were introduced by sort of shared network in Bangkok, sort of startup scene.
Yeah.
And I remember my...
Like the Bangkok, like the tech mafia.
Yes, exactly, the secret tech mafia. And I remember my first initial impression was like, oh my God, this guy's so young. How is he in venture capital?
Yeah.
So I'd like you to sort of start off by telling us what you do.
Yeah, a bit of background about me. I'm half Thai, half British. I was born in Thailand, but I kind of grew up all over the world, right? I moved around a lot when I was young. My path into tech wasn't your typical path. I mean, I lived in 6 countries. I went to 10 schools. I got kicked out of 3. But it wasn't for anything bad, right? I guess from a young age, I was always a bit of a troublemaker, or put it this way, a square peg in a round hole. And I was always challenging status quo, right? So Shrewsbury, BPS, I'm infamous there, right? But in terms of, no, but I think it sort of helps you shape the person you are today. And in tech and venture, you're always having to challenge the status quo. Right. So yeah, and then I went to boarding school in the UK. That sort of fixed me up. And then I exactly. I went to university in Nottingham actually. I stayed for 2 years and realized it was a bit it wasn't really for me.
So education, sort of structured education,
correct,
not for you.
Correct. It wasn't really. I mean, for me, I don't think I can see myself working in like a super corporate structure and things like this, right? I think I'm just too too out the box and creative to be able to do that, right?
Yeah.
And I think your time is so valuable, and I wouldn't want to be spending the time there, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I started a company in the media space, and then I started a second company in the sustainability space. Afterwards, did a bit of investing myself.
That's how we met.
Yeah, exactly.
You, yes,
it was also getting some due diligence in terms of with a particular investment I was planning to make, right? So but then as I say, and then ended up joining a firm about 2 years ago, TAV, as a VP to lead out Southeast Asia. So look, they look for just really ambitious individuals, and I think when they met me, that ticked a lot of their boxes, right? So yeah, I mean, I'm still relatively young, but I've done a few things.
How old are you now?
I'm 25.
You are 25.
Yeah.
A quarter life crisis.
Look, as I say, I'm always learning every day, right?
That's a great attitude to have. So you actually started your own first company when you were in your very early 20s.
Yeah. So I mean, as I say, I was always super creative, right, and entrepreneurial. I mean, as I say, my first ever sort of stint of entrepreneurship was whenever I was super young, and I was, as I say, I used to play a lot of video games, right? Like a lot. I was talking to my friends from EA the other day, right? And then we were chatting about it. I was like, hey, I spent so much on your game. And then I realized, and then I told them that in my first ever sort of stint in entrepreneurship, I was spending a lot of money, and then I was like, hey, I can improve my team, but I can also get good arbitrage here.
Yeah, you hack the system.
Yeah, I was like year 7, year 8.
Oh my gosh.
So I was like getting all these coins from the grey market. I didn't even have a credit card, right? And then I was selling them to my friends at break time, lunchtime. Yeah, so anyway, I think I spent more than enough in the game. I think we're even there with EA, right? But so I've always been super entrepreneurial on things like this, right? And then now in the venture landscape of things and sort of leading out the strategy for the fund and Southeast Asia, right? So yeah.
Do you feel that having been a startup founder, it's helped you become a better investor?
Yeah, I think so, because the reason I believe that is, for example, everyone on our team right now has operating background, right? It doesn't matter, you don't necessarily, like as they say, it has to be a multi-billion-dollar exit, right? But it can just having some entrepreneurial or operational background really matters, because I think in sort of this part of the world, there's a lot of venture capitalists that are not actually operators and have even done some operating experience, right? They come from, or any had started a company before. They come from consulting.
Very
they
corporate
come from
finance background.
Yeah, exactly. Investment banking, things like this, right? And that's all good whenever the market's going great, right? But whenever the market's not going great, it's like, you don't really start to look at things from founder shoes, right?
Right.
And so, for example, for us, right, we're a fund that everyone has some operating background,
Okay.
right? And we're backed by some of the unicorn founders in Europe. So we, as I say, we sort of built a flywheel where we fund the startup, right? They have an exit. They potentially be involved in our sort of ecosystem.
Yeah.
They maybe start another company.
Okay.
This Delivery Hero, which is like they pioneered food delivery, right? The founder's really well. We funded his next company. We helped him raise capital for his last company. And as I say, very close to him. He's part of the ecosystem. So it's sort of people like this, right? So yeah.
So when you say it's always good to have operational background, especially when things are difficult, right? What does that actually mean?
I think it's just like always looking at it from a founder's shoe, because I mean, like
On the balance sheet.
Correct. Like beyond like just projections and stuff, right? Because I mean, a lot of the time projections you either just miss completely or you exceed by a lot, right? I mean, that's why when I spend a lot of time with founders, I mean, we invest in the very early stages. We spend less time on that, right? We still spend some time, obviously, but we want to make sure they're realistic and it's not just like, okay, 0 to 500 million revenue in 2 years, right?
Yeah.
That's a bit unrealistic.
Yeah.
But in terms of, we want to see that the founder thinks from a first principles point of view on the way he thinks. I think that's the main thing. But I think back to your point about why that matters, operational background, because really caring about the founder and seeing that, okay, the founder can really maybe pull things around, look at it from his shoes, to say, okay, because a lot of the best companies that have been built, right, not necessarily has been the original model, right? If you look at, like, as I say, companies like Slack, things like this, didn't start with what it was, right? A lot of the time Twitch, right? Twitch was a pivot as well, right? So a lot of the companies are with pivots, right? I mean, so if you're just basing the model on what the company does at the beginning,
Yeah.
it's more or less going to change.
So you have to be, you're looking for a founder that's
You're
quick on their
just
feet,
looking
right?
for great, ambitious people, right?
Right.
And then obviously, I think it's not just pattern recognition, but it's also finding people that sort of like. It's hard to explain, but if you put in a room of 1,000 people and you say like, okay, which one or two will stand out? Those are the people we
Probably
look
harder
for.
than it sounds, right?
Yeah, it's hard. It's easy. Yeah, it's very hard to
Is that
find.
a quality? We're skipping over a bit.
Yeah. We can always come back.
Okay. Is that a quality that it's easy to find in Southeast Asia? Because I understand you're scouting the deals in the region.
I mean,
right?
so I cover this whole Southeast Asia, right? So in terms of Indonesia, Philippines, Vietnam, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand.
And I feel like a lot of media, especially in the West, they group Southeast Asia together and say SEA, but actually we're a bunch of really, really different countries.
Yeah, I think there's some characteristics between different countries, but I do think there's a lot of differences as well, right? So for example, in Thailand, Philippines, things like this, a lot of it is driven by the internet economy, right? But if you talk about the founder characteristics, I mean, obviously to build a business in Indonesia and build a business in Thailand is totally two different, the language especially, right? You need to really localize the business particularly. So it's things like this. But founders, as I say, I think we're starting to see it now. A lot of quality founders sort of come back from overseas and coming to build for the region, right? We're starting to see it. But I still think we're missing that sort of what the PayPal mafia had, right? If you look at the PayPal mafia now, they, as I say, it's probably one of the best groups, right? I mean, look, they started obviously PayPal and then they went to start like obviously Tesla, as I say, what do you call it? Affirm, all these great businesses, right? Reid Hoffman was in there, Musk, Joe Lonsdale, David Sachs, all these guys, right? So I think it's going to be hard to have something of that caliber. Yeah. But I think we need some sort of this group. I thought we were going to see it with maybe like Grab and Gojek, but I don't know if that was the one, right? So I think time will tell on that. But we are seeing good signs.
I mean, I always feel like when you read a lot about technology, especially in Thailand, it's driven a lot by corporate influence. Do you think that's actually makes it difficult for the region?
Yeah, I think people can look at two different things, right? I mean, corporates do add value, right, when there's clear synergies.
They give the ecosystem.
Correct, right? So for example, for things like distribution or things like where you can leverage their supply chain, then that makes sense, right? But if it's things like, how do I say, they're just investing for the sake of it, then it maybe does not make sense.
Like FOMO
right?
investing.
Correct. I mean, you want to just be part of the cap table. But then I think there's a world where, as I say, if you have like mature founders and things like this, you can limit the sort of the exposure of a corporate on the cap table. I think then that makes sense, right? Providing you still have the right ownership structure, you still have the right, like as I say, like the right ownership amongst the founders and things like this. Then I think corporates can help. I would limit the sort of because I mean, like once a corporate gets involved, it's very hard for it to grow and become a global juggernaut, right? So I think in terms of leave it as late as possible, and if you don't need to, don't take the capital, right?
Okay.
As they say. But I mean, if you're a good founder, I think right now there's a lot of capital where you can raise from abroad as well. So yeah.
Makes sense. Does that affect how founders approach the business? Because I think when we look at a lot of startups, especially in Thailand, a lot of solutions are very localized and tailored for corporates, right?
Yeah.
But I think to attract financial VCs, regional VCs or global VCs, you have to think beyond the Bangkok problem.
Well, that's a good question because like as I say, founders in Thailand are very good, right? But the thing is, in Thailand, we're starting to see exits, not exits, but we're starting to see some rounds being done and things like this, right? More exits on the global frame, right? I think in terms of really the sort of what's happening in sort of the US with the tech sort of system would help the sort of the innovation, right? Which is ultimately would drive countries into prosperity, things like this. If you look at time and time again, GDP rises because of innovation most of the time, right? So back to my point about Thailand, I think Thailand, as I say, it's been really tough to raise money here, right? Ultimately, if you raise money in Thailand, it's like harder than any other country, right? But for me, I was actually always very bullish on Thailand, right? Because I'm someone who likes to look at data. When you see a population, it's not just you see a population, but you see a really large middle class population, right? With a large spending power, it kind of starts to make sense, right? Because I mean, if you build companies and the markets are big enough, then I think if you have a long enough horizon, if you're a quality company, you can go public anywhere, right? But building that quality company is the hard bit. Yeah. So, yeah.
And what are the key trends that you're looking for this year?
I think there's a few, right? I mean, obviously, one thing I'm spending very closely is stablecoins, sort of the infrastructure around that. Usually, I'm not too much of a focused on that, but in terms of there's interesting use case where I can see that totally makes sense. For example, Stripe just acquired a company called Bridge XYZ for close to $2 billion. There's an opportunity to sort of build the emerging market sort of infrastructure play, especially moving fiat to crypto and crypto to fiat, right? That's really interesting because, I mean, if let's say you're right now with bank transaction, things like this, I don't think in this day and age, it should take 3 to 5 days to wire someone else money, right? And why do we have to pay quite a large amount of money, right? When the fee should be next to nothing and it should be instant, right?
Do you think we're going to start seeing big banks sort of get into this space and acquire the smaller startup?
I'm curious how it's going to work here because obviously, you know, in terms of with stablecoins and infrastructure, it's more very decentralized. Right?
Now, for dummies who may not know, stablecoin is actually a coin that's pegged to the currency. Can you explain a bit more about that?
It's pegged to the US dollar. Like could be pegged to the US dollar, could be pegged to whatever, right? I think the biggest form of it is, you know, it's I think it's, don't get me wrong, but it's Tether and Circle, right? And they're the two biggest ones right now. Okay. But I mean, I'm not looking at just stable coins, right? I'm looking more at the infrastructure. So building so the same way you have the internet, right? And then you build all these businesses on the internet.
Facilitate seamless payments.
It's like you build the network, right? So that you can facilitate all these apps and all these applications on the thing. So that's one trend. Second thing is I'm looking at is very personalized healthcare. Personalized healthcare. So like, for example, because I think what issue we're starting to having around the world is that people aren't having babies anywhere near enough, right? And I think in terms of that's a big issue because you need the sort of the next generation. So I mean, if people aren't, and I understand though because the cost of living is very high and stuff like this, but ultimately, so what makes you think is the best thing to sort of help that? It's sort of helping people try to live longer, or like as I say, looking after themselves, right? So personalized care, I think, is something. And if you look at a market like Thailand, where a large middle-class population, that sort of makes sense, right?
Yeah.
So personalized care is another one. Elderly care is interesting as well because of the aging population. And yes, I would say a lot of consumers still, right? So marketplaces and things like this.
Well, fast like consumers in Thailand, any sort of trend that you see across the world, it gets adapted into Thai culture quite quickly.
So I mean, yeah. So as I say, personalized healthcare, consumer-related businesses. I would say there's sort of a wave of influencer-driven businesses as well, but not influencer-driven like, as I say, building the product for the sake of it, right? But building and incorporating, like, let's say someone likes the product the same way like Kim Kardashian built Skims, right? In terms of for her audience, right, and things.
And
like
then launched
this.
the PE firm, and then left.
Yes, but in terms of things that are tailor-made, because
Yeah.
the thing is, you have this sort of zero CAC phenomenon where
Right.
you don't have to rely anything on marketing,
Yeah.
anything like that, right? So that's another trend. And then one final one I would maybe share is that I think there's a massive opportunity in the creator space where, like, as I say, the music, video, things like this, if you look at like Sono AI, Sora, things like this, there is a massive gap there. But I think in the B2C side, it's very tough to play, right? Because the B2C side, you're up against all the voice, right? It's like, who's your favorite singer?
Yeah.
Yeah, who's your favorite singer?
Whenever people ask me that,
Yeah.
I have no idea.
Okay, play Rihanna mixed with K-pop, right?
Right.
Obviously, that's going to get flagged on like copyright
Yeah.
point of view, but like Sono is doing something around that. But I think the massive opportunity is B2B, right? So we'll see on someone builds that. Maybe I'm looking at something already, but in terms of just things like this, right? Creator economy is very interesting, but those are probably a few things I'm quite excited for. So
Yeah. Well, I want to go back a little bit to what you said just now about influencer marketing and creator economy,
Yeah.
because I feel like you actually have a lot of experience
Yeah.
in that area. You are quite a public figure, right? If you go
Yeah, I
on
mean, look,
Instagram.
as I say, I mean, tech and finance is my main thing, my real job,
Yeah.
right?
Your day job.
Yeah, my day job, right? But I do have a media side, right? I think, as I say, I'm in a my sort of group and family, friends, things like this is pretty sort of involved in the media landscape, right? So the way I sort of look at it is that, I mean, as I say, if you're already part of it, then it makes sense to use it, grow it, things like this, right?
Leverage it for your work.
Exactly. And then also try add benefit for everyone else as well.
So
right?
I'd like to ask then, is there a strong synergy between media and tech?
There's actually a massive one, actually, because I mean, a lot
You wouldn't
of...
have thought so, right?
Yeah, true. But in terms of, there's a lot of like, how do I say, there's a lot of media personnel, like, how do you say, there's a lot of media personalities in Southeast Asia, right? But there's a lot of tech people as well,
Yeah.
right? But there's very few in the middle. There's very few that can cover, like, as I say, that have a strong both, right?
Yeah.
So if you can build that, as I say, for example, if you want to compete on a deal or something and you have a massive distribution channel, that's a massive competitive advantage. No fund in the region can compete with that.
Media
right?
is important.
Correct. So the way I look at it, I don't look at it just completely from that, but building a sort of a end-to-end distribution, which very hard for anyone in tech and media to compete. So sort of, as I say, or any fund or anything like this, right? So ultimately, as I say, you're building sort of an own creative engine, right? So yeah.
It's like part of personal branding, right?
Correct.
Which is essential.
Personal branding as well, right? But it's also, I think, as I say, building a sort of a, like, as I say, if you're a consumer startup, right, and you have like, you want to launch a coffee brand or, milk tea brand or something, or, just an F&B brand in general, and you have a massive distribution channel, you can really leverage that. Not just that, but also build a strong brand as well that actually is quality as well. So I think that's sort of the difference.
It's probably difficult to get started. Sounds great on paper by concept, right? But what would be the sort of advice that you'd want to give to someone who might be listening to this and they want to build their own brand and maybe have their own instant coffee brand one day?
Okay,
how do you get started?
Is it like, are you asking me like the advice I would give, like how I got started? Or
maybe for someone else.
Okay. So if they want to start in tech or what?
Yeah. if they want to be a startup founder, but they are
Okay, or want to go into venture capital or something?
And they don't have like a strong personal brand.
Interesting. Yeah.
How did they start?
Well, I mean, everyone will tell you in tech and venture, okay, you
Start
got
blogging.
you
right?
got no, you got to go to Stanford, you got to go to Harvard, you got to do your investment banking, then you got to do PE for a bit, you got to do McKinsey's consulting, and you got to do like this, and then eventually you'll do VC, right? But yeah, I mean, if you look at all the most interesting people in VC, it's people in this sort of different realm of things, right? They're usually come from a very, very different background, whether it's like journalism or blogging or just started content or anything like this, or just being like, just had a different path, right? Usually sometimes exit founder, things like this, right? Or as I say, or sometimes sometimes it's that sort of like traditional path, IB, PE, things like this, right? But I mean, everyone sort of has their own path. I would just say the best form thing is networking.
Okay.
Networking is just so valuable, right? I think in terms of, because I mean, a lot of people helped me really, I guess, open the doors to get me into the industry early on as well, right? But I think, I had to prove myself in certain things as well to show that, okay, yeah, I could do it, right? Because I think coming in the industry at a young age, right, compared to like, let's say others, especially in a country like market like Southeast Asia, it's very like hierarchy thinking, right? So for example, I mean, I'm 25, but as I say, people they say, oh yeah, but you're too young to do this, all right? In terms of you need to be a certain age to be as they say, a VP or partner or whatever, right? But people in the US are like, they're running billions in AUM at like 20 or 22. So I think, as I say, it's just that different mindset, right? And I think you had to do more with less here. Right. So it's just, as I say, back to the point of just networking as much as possible. Meeting, as I say, trying to just add as much value for people. That's what I did. I mean, like, I help people like HD, structure things, get through things. And then just like, as I say, and you do that enough times, people will recognize your value. Not everyone, but key people. And that was what matters at the end of the day. And always be humble. And as I say, for me, I always look to, as I say, also give back as well, right? Because I mean, a lot of people has helped me, so why can't I help other people as well? So,
So would you say that you also have to sort of cover your own niche and then find your own distribution channel, start writing?
Yeah, I would say, I think you got to find something you're passionate about, right? You shouldn't do it just for the sake of it, right? If you have that option, right? You should do it because you really enjoy it, right? Or you see an angle where okay, this is something I could do better than anyone else, right? Because you don't necessarily have to be the best person in that particular area, right? As long as you're in the top 5% of like the top 3 or 4 things, that's okay, right?
Yeah.
And and sort of like navigate from there. But as I say, getting the most valuable experience, I always say like joining a startup, and then there's a few ways you can do it, but obviously I think experience is what matters the most. So yeah.
And so we'll jump a little bit we're going to go back to Southeast Asia.
We'll figure it out.
Yeah, we'll figure it out.
No worries.
If you can tell me the most interesting idea or product that you've come across in the past year in Southeast Asia, what would you say?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I've seen probably 1,000 companies, so like it's probably a bit more. Okay, I'm gonna have to refresh my memory here.
Do you think that these sort of innovations or solutions to very big problems, they're hard to bring to Thailand, right?
They're hard to bring to Thailand, but I think it's step by step, right? So for example, one company, I'm quite excited about, quite interested on is sort of like bringing this sort of like financial literacy approach to Thailand, right? It's sort of it's a company called Kuhn. So there's a company called JAR in India, right, which raised, as I say, a couple $100 million, stuff like this, right? And they were scaling up, and they built it for Indians, right? But the issue right now is whether you're old or young, in Thailand, everyone cares about gold. Rich or poor, everyone cares about gold. So it's like, but the issue of gold is that you have to there's a minimum threshold before you can buy gold, right? So imagine you can allow the average Grab driver to save 20 baht, 50 baht every day in gold, right? 20 baht, let's say. That over a year, 2 years, that adds up, right? So I think it's just, this could be an actually interesting way to educate from a financial literacy point of view, because I mean, consumer debt levels in Southeast Asia are some of the highest in the world.
Regulations need to catch up first.
Correct. But no, as I say, they actually don't. They work with Safegold. So in terms of they use their license and stuff like this, so they act as a consumer play. So that's an interesting way maybe they can penetrate the market. But yeah, I mean, as I say, so it's just really interesting models. But look, we speak to really interesting individuals every day.
Yeah.
That's why we're generalist investors. I think the market, as I say, in Southeast Asia especially, you really have to have a general approach, right? Because I think the market is too small to be just only a fintech fund or something like this. So yeah, or like a, say a
you have to be open-minded and everything fund.
Yeah, correct. You need to back great people. Yeah. That's what you have to do. So yeah.
And like you said earlier in this interview that you have always been bullish about Thailand.
Yeah.
And that's still true today?
Yeah. I think I believe that's the case. Because as I say, the market, I mean, as I say, look, liquidity is always an issue, right, in certain markets, but I think the public markets are a bit better here, because before companies can go public, you have to be profitable and stuff like this, right? So you don't have unprofitable businesses and things like this, right? I think it's just sort of like how big can companies get, right? I mean, as I say, I wrote a sort of a thesis or whatever, what you want to call it, during like 2021 period, 2022, about I was talking about that exits in emerging markets are going to be between 100 to 300 million, right? So therefore, they were not going to probably have like 3 to 5 billion exits. So the way you have to structure the fund sizes and things like this are going to have to be very different, right? In terms of portfolio construction, not just portfolio construction, but how much AUM you have, things like this. So yeah.
And from a startup point of view, what would be the advice that you would give to a Thai startup founder looking to raise money, maybe from your fund this year?
Yeah, I mean,
what would you
we
be
want to
looking for?
do more Thai deals, right? 100%. I think it's, as I say, we participate in HD Series A here, right? I was an early investor there, obviously very familiar. Things like this. Good friend of both of ours.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's just build something unique, right? Don't chase the trends. You can if you think that there's an angle, but in terms of if you want to build something that's long lasting, build something with real fundamentals, right? And if you build a great business, investors will come, right? And I mean,
a strong business.
Correct. Yeah, as I say, so. But Thai founders are pretty good at building a sort of a profitability business, right? But I think be ambitious, right? Try be a regional business. Try be a global business. Why can't a Thai business be a global business, right? Why can't we have a team of engineers here with clients in the US?
Yeah.
You think that that's possible?
Yeah.
Maybe. We'll see.
I think so.
Right.
I think so.
I think, as I say, we're starting to see that in countries like India, right? But they had leverage a lot of the engineering talent, and then they and then they sell to the US, right?
So it goes back to education, right? We need more people in STEM, and we need maybe more government support, more grants.
Yeah, I think so. I think I don't know if we need too many people in STEM, right? But it's more, I think what we need like more sort of particular like trade schools and things like this, right?
Okay.
In particular industries you want to go after, right? And I think another thing we need is the way ecosystems thrive is not just venture capitalists like us, or like we're not taking credit, but in terms of just people that finance it, but it's also the governments as well that needs to play a part in this, right? So it's like everyone needs to work together. Like the ecosystem's small, we all have to do our part. As I say, we can provide the capital, we just need the right regulation, the right infrastructure to be ready for the ecosystem. But in certain categories, it's there, right? But in certain categories, it's going to take time. But for us, we back founders very early, right? So for example, one of our investments we made in a company in Europe, right, which is bringing the first longevity drugs to the market, we backed the founder off an idea, right? Because he had a massive chip on his shoulder, but he wanted to bring the first longevity drugs to the market, right? To really change the way people think of longevity, right? So it's things like that. And then they just recently closed 100 million Series C. Yeah. So it's just really, but it's really just backing really smart, unique individuals.
You can take it
next
all the way.
question you're gonna ask are what are the traits, but yeah.
No.
in terms of smart, ambitious individual people. Not just that, but really they don't necessarily have to go to these top institutions and stuff like this.
Or have the traditional
Yes.
background, right?
I think as if they're really ambitious, they want to build something,
They just
and
have
they just
to have
and
the
they
idea.
and they have this unique sort of like thing. They look at it and they have this massive competitive advantage.
Yeah,
I'd
they're
love
just
to.
gonna
I'd
run
love
with
to
it.
hear more. Right. I mean,
Yeah.
like in terms of such people like that, we want to see.
Once a startup or a founder goes into your portfolio, what can they expect?
So I mean,
what do you
we've
expect
made
from
quite
founders?
a lot of investments, right? I mean, we've invested in over 250 companies now.
Yeah.
We've had, I think, over 80 exits. We've had 15 unicorns, so $1 billion companies, and I think over 6 IPOs, right? So I think you can sort of see like the transition.
track record.
It's track record, right? But in terms of, the sort of the way, and we focus on pre-seed to Series A,
Yeah.
right? So I mean, obviously, where we can help is we can, at the earliest stages, we can help them a lot, right? Really navigate, help them find the clients. We, as I say, we have a massive portfolio, so we can really open up our portfolio, whether that could be potential clients and things like this for them, right? Another 200 companies, right? Hey, you want more clients? Pitch to these people, see if they would be interested in what you're building, right? And then, yeah, as I say, follow-on financing is probably another thing as well. So yeah, it's things like that, but it's also maybe certain opportunities as well where maybe they're looking to hire people, so we could help in the hiring process and things like this. But usually we don't take too many board seats unless we have like strong ownership in the company, because we were more like quite collaborative investors, because of our fund sizes and things like this, right? We're not a $500 million fund, but as I say, we want to raise less capital but return much more capital, put it this way. I think it's different strategy to a lot of funds, so yeah.
So you guys actually get very involved in the startup?
At the beginning, like providing the ownership percentage is there. I mean, usually we don't want to just be another check, right? We want to, like as I say, we want to at least help them with follow-on financing, close a round, whatever it is, connect them with their first few hires, potentially things like this, right? But obviously it depends on our ownership percentage, because you only have X amount of hours in a day, X amount of days in a week, X amount of days in a month as well, right? So it really, really depends. So we need to really spend the time where we have the most ownership in companies, right? But we, as I say, if you become sort of a portfolio company of ours, we will do what we can to help you.
And for those who may not be familiar with the industry, what's the key difference between being a corporate venture capital firm and a financial VC, as you say?
When people invest in corporate venture, you fund a company, it's not necessarily funded from a financial impact, from a financial point of view, right? It's more or less could be just, as I say, it's a strategic alignment, for example.
Synergy, right?
Yeah,
Say a bank sets up a fund, they find a fintech company.
Correct, and then they build it or do the same thing. But in terms of it, it's more just, as I say, finding the sort of the difference, and then sort of, in a way, a corporate at the beginning would be less, they like a corporate, then they're just, okay, I'll put in the money and sort of see how it goes. But for us, obviously, we're, at the end of the day, we're investors, right? Yeah. So we want to make a return for our investors as well, right? Yeah. But obviously make an impact as well for this particular region. That's why for Fund 3, which for Southeast Asia, I'm sort of helping lead out that strategy. Okay. We want to have decent, strong exposure for Southeast Asia, because as people are pulling back, we see this as a good time to actually deploy capital, right? So I mean, like when people actually say it's like, oh yeah, I mean, yeah, well, none of these funds in the region are touching it. I'm like, well,
it's mine now.
Not just that, yeah, but in terms of like, it's like, oh, could there be a good opportunity? Like everyone right now is focusing on generative AI, right? Or like build like foundation models, right?
You
or
might be looking elsewhere.
And I'm trying to, like, I'm looking at the things like direct to consumer, as I say, looking at, to be honest, there's interesting use cases in AI which we've done where you're building out the infrastructure and it's more on the consumer, like the application layer for like areas which are not your typical traditional industry, like you're not typical marketing, legal industry, stuff like that, which I feel like GPT is going after. The GPT will have a strong stance against, but this is more like agriculture and stuff like that, where there are strong use cases for that. So that's, I think, something. Yeah.